now firmly believe that the increased radiation we're living in from radio and TV and radars and appliances compared to the turn of the century is contributing to our background rates of ill health.
The evidence shows that there's a causal link between the radiation and alteration of cellular tissue in the brain.
The research indicates that there is no significant scientific nexus between the use of cellular phones and a variety of different health effects that have been investigated, Senator.
People who sell mobile phones are making a positive assertion of safety or zero risk that just cannot be done.
Since 1975 in the United States, there's been a 25% increase in brain tumors. Worldwide, there's been a 300% increase in brain tumors.
Over millions of years, life has evolved on an Earth where the natural background level of radio frequency radiation, or RFR, has been very low. Then, starting only 100 years ago, the explosion in wireless technologies like radio, TV, radar, and microwave has boosted our everyday RFR exposure levels by at least 10,000 times. Our bodies and each of the cells within them are like antennas, extremely sensitive receivers and emitters of electromagnetic radiation. Now they must function in a new electromagnetic environment that already has 10,000 times more RFR than the one in which they evolved. And today, a new wireless revolution is in progress, with the number of cell phones, communication satellites, microwave antennas, and cell phone towers multiplying daily. That means even more RFR exposure for all of us. Not surprising, then, that around the world, growing numbers of citizens, scientists, and public officials are beginning to ask, just what are the human health and environmental effects of the wireless revolution? Isn't it about time we find out?
The Northern California Cancer Center has been tracking this since the 70s. The report came out to the public about 5 years ago that in Marin County we had the highest rate of breast cancer in the world, they said at the time, but certainly in the United States as far as we know. I'm the founder and executive director of Marin Breast Cancer Watch. We were founded 4.5 years ago. About 6 months after I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and asked the question, why does Marin County have the highest rate? Of course, the question was, how could this be possible when it's such a beautiful place and everybody's so health conscious and exercises and eats organic and does all the things that are supposed to make you very healthy? I mean, we've been told that it's because we're rich, white, and educated, and for some reason, we prefer not to believe that that's true. We want to find out what is true. So we're going ahead and starting our own survey. We do have an epidemiologist who's a volunteer who's working with us. We're just beginning to do this, and it's very, very exciting. My hunches are the military. During the Second World War, we were ringed by radar stations. There was also a very large radar station on top of Mount Tam, which is probably still in operation. And because there are many, many wealthy people living here, they can afford all the toys that everybody wants. And we've got them all right here. The cell phones are all over the place. Not to mention the microwaves and all the rest of it. So we've surrounded ourselves with toxicity, and we're paying the price.
People are getting sick. And then they bring this proposal to put up a new public safety system, which was designed by Motorola. It's called the Marin Emergency Radio Authority, MIRA. And that will add 17 more facilities on the hilltops throughout Marin, and it will add to the radiation background. Now, remember, we already have the highest rates of breast cancer, the highest rates of prostate cancer. We're already concerned about our health, and this is yet another layer.
We've heard a lot of questions about radio frequencies and their effects, and tonight we have an expert who will be meeting with us.
How much of an increase in the radio waves we receive would this create for the average San Rafael citizen?
If you are any distance from these sites, the increase is going to be insignificant, probably unmeasurable.
Okay, then I will call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. I think this is a substantial move forward for public safety in our county.
We're not against public safety, we just don't want this to cause more health problems. You know, there was a study recently done on Cape Cod where they found that in 45% of all the cases of breast cancer, the women had lived near radio or TV towers. So we are therefore doing a map. We're going to put it on computer, it's going to be interactive, and we're going to identify all the sites of licensed wireless facilities so we can identify them by frequency, by power density, and relative altitude, longitude, latitude. So we can calculate the exposure conditions to the nearby communities and compare the epidemiology study results that are being done by the Marin Breast Cancer Watch to see whether these facilities, in addition to what else is already there, may be causing harm. Right across the Golden Gate in San Francisco, there is a huge 990-foot tower called Sutro Tower. It has nearly 200 antennas there already, and there are proposals to add to that infrastructure and build in HD TV antennas. Scientists say that it's very possible that residents far below and homes across the bay could also be affected by a radiating tower that's this complex that sends signals quite a distance.
I'm so glad that this conference is being held in a church, and it's being held in this church. This is my church, and 2.5 years ago there was a proposal to put a cell tower up on the cupola. Well, it didn't go up there. It took about 7 months for people to decide not to put it there, but in the process we learned a lot about this issue. And having the conference here 2.5 years later helps to confirm that we are making progress in getting other people to pay attention to this issue so wise public policy decisions can be made.
Electromagnetic fields are intrinsic to us. They are in us. We can measure them. Our heartbeat, you have the ECG. They are in us. They are us. They are our intelligence. They are our cells.
Your body is an antenna. So you absorb the radiation in proportion to the resonance between your body size and the optimal aerial. People find it difficult to understand how a very small magnetic field could change cell behavior when the Earth's magnetic field is so powerful. But the difference is the Earth's magnetic field in which our ancestors were living is a static field. When you take a field and you oscillate it, then cells that are changing with time have this oscillating field imposed on them, then that's what changes the behavior. We have 23 studies now showing epidemiologically increased brain tumour in EMR-exposed people. 4 of them only show increases in cancer. 19 show statistically significant increase in cancer, and 5 show dose-response relationships. That is a causal set of data. Where careful studies have been carried out near high-powered facilities, an increase in a wide range of cancers has been found. The most prevalent is leukemia, and a whole range of leukemias, from myeloid leukemias, lymphatic leukemias. But the class of leukemias is often found. It's found in military personnel who are exposed to radar and radio. It's found in ham radio operators. It's found in children who live near a transmission tower in Hawaii. It's found in the US Embassy in Moscow.
The Russians, between 1953 and 1976, irradiated with radio frequency the personnel of the US Embassy in Moscow. It wasn't clear why they decided to do this. And it wasn't until the ambassador came down with leukemia, and then a second ambassador who replaced him later came down with leukemia, that serious attention was felt, and samples of blood were taken and sent back to the U.S., and they were found to show increased frequency of DNA abnormalities, a failure to reproduce. The radiofrequency sickness syndrome, which the Russians felt was one of the bases for their health protection guidelines, which were much lower than in the West, was reproduced in the embassy staff according to the criteria that were used in the survey. So one of the mysteries of the Cold War, why did the Russians irradiate the U.S. embassy, could be answered because they wanted to produce this interference with the ability to concentrate, the ability to sleep, the ability to think, which were aspects of the radiofrequency sickness syndrome, which they defined previously under experimental conditions. And they succeeded not only in doing it, but they succeeded in getting the U.S. leading epidemiologists to document it and then ignored it.
What is adequate evidence for decision making? Well, it depends on who you are. For the scientist, in order to come up with conclusive scientific evidence, which is a very high standard of evidence, we're looking at almost 100% certainty that an effect occurs. But is this the right forum, and is this the right level of evidence that we need to make good decisions if we are a city or county that is mandated to protect public health and safety under the state zoning codes? We don't need that much evidence at all, do we? Now, the legal standard may be something down here. Maybe we only have to be about 51% certain, the more likely than not test. But we take action with less information and with less certainty. Now, under the California Environmental Quality Act, all we have to have is the potential for a significant impact, don't we? Anytime you see an environmental impact report, we're not looking for certainty of effect. 10 to 30% certainty is enough to take an action that is protective of public health. This is where we're operating when we talk about public decision making for cell siting, not over here. Do we have enough scientific evidence to be 10 to 30% certain that we may have an effect, and should we be careful? And do we do that for every other environmental constraint? You bet we do.
Radio frequency exposures began during the Second World War with the introduction of radar. The people who were exposed were mostly soldiers, some people in industry that were making products that were sold to the Army and Air Force. And the evidence that was accumulated showed evidence of effects on blood count, evidence of effect on mutation and cellular reproduction, cataract in the eye, occurrence of headache and fatigue, and some increase in cancer. This occurred within a few decades of the discovery of radar, and the data were not very widely disseminated, and partly that's because people weren't concerned about what might happen in 25 years to technicians who were exposed at that time. They were fighting a war. And part of the problems that we have today derives from that rather realistic but not very sensitive preoccupation.
The United States permits some of the greatest levels of exposure to the human populations in the world. If you compare those standards to other countries in Europe and China and Russia, you will note that the standards are much lower. They're all looking at the same science base. So why is there such a difference?
The spectrum goes all the way from extra low frequency, 60 hertz power fields that give us electricity, all the way up through radio waves, microwaves, and the communication frequencies, and then on over into the visible light, and then further than that we're into ionizing radiation or X-rays and gamma rays. And in the old days, we used to think only the ionizing radiation part of the spectrum was carcinogenic or had the potential to cause cancer. Well, we're finding that that was maybe too arbitrary a delineation, and now we're seeing that we may have carcinogenic effects down in the lower frequency ranges. And we're talking about power, and we're talking about communication, wireless communication.
I moved out of California up to Washington State after Dynasty because I wanted some fresh air. I wanted to live where they had clean water, and I just liked the whole environmental state of Washington. I really love it up there. I'm very happy. But I've had some interesting experiences since I've moved up there. They're going to put up a cell tower right near our house, like less than half a mile. It's going to be loaded with unlimited Whipson antennas. Now, 300 feet, and the extra 15 are for the Whipson antennas, is 40 feet less than the Space Needle in Seattle. This is not exactly something we're going to be able to ignore. How is this possible? I mean, here we are today in this age, and we have resources, and we can say all the things that need to be said, but we didn't know what needed to be said. We were ignorant. We went to the hearing passionate, and it didn't mean anything what we said. They said, well, these are all health issues, this doesn't really count, and so, okay, we lost. My intention is to let the American public know we have no rights, which is a frightening thing.
The FCC has the regulatory power over telecommunication facilities through the Telecommunications Act of 1996. What local governments have control over, what we have the authority to do, is only to regulate the placement, the construction, and the design of telecommunication facilities. We are prohibited from taking into consideration the health and safety impacts of those antennas.
So what do you want the government to do?
Well, firstly, I need the laws to be changed, because what we found out is that the public really doesn't have much of a chance against the Telecommunications Act. The way that it is structured, very few people will be able to beat it. What I want the American public to know is that they've got to have knowledge and information. That's why seminars like this are so important. If we had had the knowledge, we could have fought a better battle and perhaps stopped this. And I have a lawyer, I mean, I have resources. I can just imagine what the average American is going to come up against when they try to fight this, if this is going to go in my backyard.
They came to our neighborhood and put up a tower about 1 year ago, and we've all been fighting it because it's just been a blight on our neighborhood. We've been working on a moratorium within Butte County, and they've adopted the strongest ordinance in the United States. And we're hoping the city of Chico will follow suit, and so will other cities and areas.
If Pacific Bell can afford to advertise at $1 million+ a year, as they are here by this wonderful stadium, they can certainly afford to take the time and the money to locate cellular phone towers in places other than in neighborhoods. The Telecommunications Act of 1996, Section 704, provides that we can't do anything about the health risks according to the Congress. But the local governments are still allowed to determine where to locate the towers within reason. In fact, what the law says is the only prohibition is that the local government cannot prohibit the tower altogether. All we're asking is for Pac Bell Wireless to be a good neighbor and not to put cell towers over 100 feet tall in the middle of neighborhoods, especially trying to take advantage of people in the Central Valley who they think are stupid and poor.
We think that we have to work with people across the state and across the nation in order to protect them from predators like Pac Bell Wireless.
The only thing that communities can do is write an ordinance, and that takes time, and usually it's only after a disaster has happened, like in our community. We were successful in lobbying our public officials for a county ordinance, but it's too late for us.
It appears to me that the time has come for a precautionary note in this process. 25,000 of these cell phones are being sold a day. Tens of millions of people around the earth are using them. And there is substantial question as to whether or not health studies have been done adequately. What this legislation does is bring some consumer confidence back by trying to assure our consumers that consumers have what all consumers need and have a right to in the marketplace, which is accurate information and choice.
Each of these phones must meet stringent emission standards set by the FCC in concert with the IEEE and a number of the other engineering organizations. The levels that they meet are far below, I mean, the emission standards are far below any levels even close to causing any kind of a biological effect, much less an adverse health effect.
In the summer of 1998, I had taken a job working for a startup company that was manufacturing the next generation of cellular phones. I went to work for this company as the director of worldwide sales. After a couple months, we were issued these prototype cell phones. Most of the employees in the company were issued the phones, and we were told to use them and test them and evaluate them. That's what we did for several months. I used that phone daily. The phone is designed to be operated with your thumb in a one-handed fashion. Being right-handed, I always held the phone on my right side. In early 1999, I had a seizure that was later diagnosed as a cancerous brain tumor. A mass growing in my head that was 5.5 centimeters by 5.5 centimeters, about the size of a tennis ball. The speed with which the tumors can grow is amazing. Cancerous tumors are rated on a scale of 1 to 4, and 4 being the fastest growing tumor. And a grade 4 tumor can grow from the size of a grape to the size of a tennis ball in 2 months. And mine was graded between a 2 and a 3, so we're guessing that mine probably took somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 months to grow, which would coincide with about the period that I was using the cell phone. I now believe that the phone was the culprit in at least triggering my brain tumor to occur. My brain tumor occurred right on the right side of my head, right on the temple, right where I held the phone.
What does the 1.6 watts per kilogram mean for the public? It's basically a safety limit, and it's a safety limit which has been developed by consensus of the Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, NIOSH, and the National Institutes of Health. And it has substantial safety factors in it, 50-fold safety factors that provide assurances that these products are safe.
I think all of us here in the committee don't want to see 10 years down the line a situation like with tobacco.
We've collected credible scientific evidence from around the world that reports study after study of health effect or bioeffect at lower than standard levels. If this bar represents the standard, what is allowable, look at where these studies fall in terms of health effects reported at lower levels. Sometimes if you just put this on in front of a decision maker and say, well, you know, maybe we don't have conclusive evidence, but we have all these studies and they're all talking about health effects down here. and here's the standard. You know, something must be wrong. Maybe we should be careful. Maybe we shouldn't put this in the middle of a school ground, or maybe we shouldn't put it in the middle of a residential neighborhood, or maybe we shouldn't put it anywhere near people until we have a lot more evidence.
We found that cells inside the brain, after exposure to radio frequency radiation, have DNA damage. And these are so-called strand breaks. The DNA basically breaks up into pieces.
This is what's called a comet assay, DNA comet assay. The length of the comet tail there is quite long. All of those fragments represent broken DNA. Now what's important is that the FCC limit here is 1.6 watts per kilogram, SAR. Here we've only got 0.6 and here we've got 1.2. So these are still below standard. You know, conventional wisdom has that there should be no effect. They are clearly breaking DNA and or interfering with DNA repair.
In my experiment, I only expose animals for a short time. Now then the question is asked, what happens if you're exposed to radiation from, for example, from a cell tower? Of course, it's a long-term exposure. So the main question is, will the effect accumulate over time? Now there's some indication that they accumulate. So a long-term exposure to a low intensity may have the same effect as a short-term 1 or 2 hour exposure for high intensity.
Our office is located on the 3rd floor of an office building with another building just about 150 feet away that's at the same elevation as our office. It's 3-story. And it is now the home of 28 cell phone and PCS antennas that sit on the top of this building. They are hidden behind a skirt or parapet on the top. Nevertheless, they radiate their radio frequency radiation directly through that and across the buildings in front of us, and the side lobe of those antennas hits this building. When we were unsuccessful in asking the county to consider another location for these antennas, we measured to find out what kind of radio frequency exposure we have here. We bought a small detector to measure the fields, and then we looked for solutions that we could put in place. And these solutions turned out to be a combination of shielding with fabric over the windows, which is actually silver mesh, and it does block radio frequency radiation. To handle the problem outside of the window areas, we purchased a special kind of paint that is copper-based, copper fleck paint, and that paint reflects radio frequency. It keeps it outside for the most part. So with a combination of painting and putting up curtains, we were able to reduce the radio frequency inside the office. So it's not perfect, but it does a fairly good job in comparison to no shielding. This is a scientific study